We'd like to thank you all for coming out here today on a beautiful Canberra afternoon, which is a bit better than the Canberra morning that we charged out into this morning. There's various politicians and union leaders here this afternoon, and I'd just like to acknowledge a few. We'd like to acknowledge Anthony Albanese, the Shadow Minister for Transport, Glenn Searle, Senator Glenn Searle, the Chair of the Flag Convenience Inquiry, a long-term friend of the union, Bob Cutter, and Michelle O'Neill, the National Secretary of the TCFUA. Thanks very much all of you for coming out today. It's been a great day. We had some excellent speeches early on in the day, and once again the Embassy has proven its worth in the fact that we are exposing this government for what it is and their outright attack on the working people of this country. So without further ado, I'd like to call on the Shadow Minister for Transport, Mr Anthony Albanese.
Thanks, comrades and friends, and can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country and pay my respect to their elders past and present. Can I also acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues, trade union leaders who are here, but more importantly than any of us, the working people who are here. Working people sending a message to those people up on the hill in the House of Representatives and the Senate that jobs matter, that jobs matter. You hear a lot of rhetoric from this government about Australian jobs and employment. But what they have said about doing with conscious policies written in legislation is the replacement of Australian seafarers around our coasts with foreign workers, and the replacement of the Australian flag on the back of Australian vessels with a foreign flag. And when employers raise this with people from the department and representatives of the government, they were told very explicitly, well, what you should do is just re-flag your ship and employ foreign workers instead of Australian workers. It's not on. And I pay tribute particularly to people from the Portland. There you have the most crass example possible, whereby under Australian law it is permissible to have a temporary licence given, but only when an Australian vessel is not available. That's what the legislation says. And it has to be for a temporary voyage. But what we have in Portland is pretty simple. There's two destinations, Portland and Western Australia. Resources from Western Australia, refinery in Portland, Victoria. It's not complex, it's not temporary, it's not casual, it's permanent. And it is an absolute abuse of the legislation, an absolute conscious abuse by this government to allow a foreign ship to do that work. And what's more, the workers, of course, were kicked off with no notice in the middle of the night. In the middle of the night. Now, there's a range of reasons why, as an island continent, it's important that we have an Australian shipping industry. Firstly, there's the reason of national security. At a time where we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Coral Sea, we should acknowledge the relationship which has always been there between our merchant fleet and our military fleet. The exchange of skills that are required. The people who run our naval fleet, who run our ports, who run our ships, those skills are interchangeable. And if we don't have an ongoing Australian fleet with the Australian flag on the back, with training at places like the AMC, in Launceston, then that will have a long-term impact on the defence of this country. And that was acknowledged by the Workforce Forum that I set up as a minister, that made very clear recommendations and established for $10 million, a minuscule amount, a long-term workforce development plan, one that was supported by the Navy, one that was supported by the industry, one that was supported by all of the unions, and they walked away from it when they came into office. Secondly, there's the region of our national economy. If there are two areas of industry that are important to a nation state, they're aviation and they're shipping. That's why most countries in the world recognise that. The Jones Act recognises that in the United States, recognises that there's an economic interest in having a domestic shipping fleet to undertake domestic voyages around the coast, but also that there's an international argument as well of why you want to see the Australian flag, like we want to see the flying kangaroo on the back of planes all around the world. An economic interest that is very clear. And thirdly, there's an environmental interest. Every time there's been an incident, be it the Pacific Adventurer, the Sheneng, they've had something in common. There hasn't been an Australian flag on the back of those vessels. Because Australian workers who work around our coast understand where the ships need to go. For the Sheneng, of course, off Gladstone, it just forgot to turn through the channel. So it hit the Great Barrier Reef and ripped a great big damn hole in it. The incident in New Zealand off its major port, again, a foreign flagship of convenience. And that's why as well, there's a third interest, the environmental interest of having that knowledge, skills-based, of people who run the ships around our coast. So I say to you that you're not just defending your jobs and the jobs of your co-workers, you're defending the national interest. And I pay tribute to you for being here day after day and continuing to keep up the struggle. And I say that the Labor Party is with you. And there are good people in the Parliament as well, like my mate Bob Katter, who will always be with you as well, consistently. Glenn Sterle in the Senate has done an amazing job of having hour after hour in the Senate through those committee processes, making a difference. Local members like Josh and Brian, who are here from Tasmania, and Freo, they're standing up, they understand. And if you look at the prospects, you look at the Tasmanian industry, who were investing $100 million in a new ship ready to go. And this government discards the importance of that investment as well, because there's an industry here as well potentially for us in terms of the shipbuilding industry that we should be encouraging to thrive in this nation. So thank you for all that you do. We'll continue to fight the fight. I'll go in the budget lockup and have a look at what latest atrocities we can expect tonight. But I assure you, on behalf of the Australian Labor Party, Bill Shorten and the team, that we stand in solidarity with you. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Anthony. And just, if I could, as one of the numerous proud seafarers here today, from the rank and file seafarers and the MUA membership, we give a heartfelt thank you to you and those in the Labor Party, and to you, Bob Katter, who have fought this fight and continue to fight beside us. And we thank you once again. Thank you. We'd also like to also acknowledge Joe Schofield, the National Secretary of United Voice, Josh Wilson, the member for Fremantle, Lisa Chesters, the member for Bendigo, Brian Mitchell, the member for Lyons, and Emma Maiden from Union New South Wales. Thanks for coming along. Okay, now I'd like to call upon a friend of the MUA and a friend of the union movement as a whole, and someone who I've had the pleasure of listening to speak quite a bit over the last few months, and I always enjoy her thoughts and the passion that she delivers for her members, and it's Michelle O'Neill from the TFCUA.
Thanks, comrade, and I want to start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on here today and pay all my respects to their elders past and present. And I want to thank the MUA for reconvening this important issue of the Jobs Embassy, for bringing the Australian Union movement to Canberra again, to stand out the front of that house, and bring to them the reality of what is happening to working people around this country. The MUA do a fantastic job fighting for their members' jobs and their members' rights and conditions. And we've got with us today the workers from MV Portland who were thrown off not just their job but their home and have been fighting for their rights ever since. And we've also got workers from other industries and other unions involved in really important struggles about the rights of workers in this country and fundamentally about the sort of country we are. And what I want to talk to you about today is what could be done. What could be done to deliver quality jobs by this government. By a government that we know doesn't care. By a government, it's budget night, a government, the only thing we know for sure that this government is going to spend money on is that they're going to spend $56 billion giving big corporations a tax cut. That's what they're giving our taxpayers' money away to. And what I want to talk about is what they could do with taxpayers' money that could deliver quality jobs. Because my union, along with many others, knows the human face of what happens when workers lose a job. The MV Portland fellas know it too. Because companies or a government might say those workers are redundant. But what we know, what the workers, their families, their communities, their comrades know is that those people aren't redundant. They're hard-working people who want to keep working, who want to keep giving, who want to keep paying their taxes, keep putting in. And when they're thrown out of a job, it's not just their pocket that suffers, it's the people that care about them who suffer too. And it's their communities. It's both the personal and the political, this story. And we should never forget the personal part of it. Because this is the human cost of failed economic policy. This is the human cost of a government that cares more about its big business friends than it does about ordinary working people, who has industrial policies that are about letting the Fair Work Ombudsman fine workers who fought for their jobs, that have industry policies that do nothing about keeping local jobs here in Australia, that pretend that we can have trade policies that are so-called free trade, that have not a skerrick of fairness in them, and a government that actually turns its back on its responsibilities. Because do you know, in last financial year, they spent $56 billion on buying goods and services for the government out of taxpayers' money. Now that's a good thing, spending taxpayers' money on buying goods and services, you would think. But there is no commitment to spend that money on buying those goods and services from companies that are employing workers here in Australia. So in my industry, let me give you 3 quick examples. Rossi Boots in 2014, the Defence Department, an order over 5 years for 100,000 pairs of boots that could have been made by our members there in Adelaide. What do? They send it offshore. Gone. Who knows where? No requirement for transparency, no requirement to show that there's any sort of fair wages, conditions or safety for whoever in the world is making those boots. They don't care about the workers who make them here in Australia, and they definitely don't care about the workers who make them anywhere else in the world. All they care about is so-called value for money, but even that isn't true, because what they actually mean when they say value for money is lowest cost. At whatever price, whatever human price, lowest cost. So Rossi Boots, number 1. Number 2, the next year in 2015, 80 hard-working, long-serving, really highly skilled machinists in Footscray in Melbourne. They made defence uniforms. The government decided, well, we don't need a few factories and companies making defence uniforms. Let's just keep one. Let's take the tender that this company had had for years and years off them. And 80 workers out on the scrap heap. And number 3, just last year, a $9.6 million contract to make non-combat uniforms for the Defence Forces. And the reason I say non-combat is because they have this crazy rule, crazy procurement rule that says if you're making combat uniforms, they've got to be made here in Australia. But somehow what our soldiers wear when they're not in their combat uniforms doesn't have to be made here. It's still their uniforms, they're still workers, they're still soldiers. But that work, $9.6 million contract, gone offshore. So 3 examples only. But what's the impact of that? The impact of that is a government that has crazy procurement rules that do not deliver and pretend it's value for money, but what they need to do is redefine value for money. Because what we want to see and what the union movement is calling for is procurement rules that say we want to have social value included. We want to see that there's jobs created. We want to see that they're good quality, ethical jobs where workers are paid fairly and treated with dignity and respect. We want to see that there's environmental considerations put in place in terms of the procurement dollar. We want to see that there's training for workers, apprenticeships. We want to see that there's actually a plan that is about churning this money to change the sort of community we have, to reduce unemployment, to reduce underemployment, to try and do something about the huge growth in casual, insecure work. And all of those people who need more money and more hours of work in this country who don't even get paid leave. So our call is for a government that changes the rules and simply says that they will spend government taxpayers' money on government goods and services that deliver the sort of values that matter to the workers behind me here, the sort of values that matter to our union movement, the sort of values that say people are important, that we want value for money that drives economic change, fairness, good quality jobs, and that respects at its heart workers and their families and their communities. Thanks, comrades.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And we see once again, whether it's procurement with the steel industry in Port Kembla or Whyalla, or along with manufacturing throughout the textile industry, this government does not care 1 second how far they drive this country down when it comes to putting costs ahead of workers. Now I'd like to call upon Senator Glenn Sterle, the chair of the FOC inquiry, and there's a lot of people standing behind me and around on the lawn here today who have been on FOC vessels and have gone and done inspections on behalf of the ITF, and you have only got to see the state of these vessels once to see the appalling conditions that these seafarers have to put up with every day they're working at sea, whether it's poor food, no water, and then to have their pay withheld from their families, or they pay to go to sea themselves. It is an absolute disgrace. And the work that the FOC inquiry is doing is great work, and anyone who's been on board those vessels will support it. Thanks very much, Glenn.
Thanks so much for that. Look, first of all, I'd like to thank Albo. I always seem to get the shit end of the deal. I always have to speak after Albo, after Michelle, and normally after Paddy. Thank goodness I've beaten Paddy today, because once Paddy speaks, it's game over for everyone else. Because he's brilliant, and Bob, yeah, and you too, Bob. I just want to let everyone know here, truly say this from my heart, that I'm a friend of the MUA and have been a friend of the MUA in their previous 2 existences as the Seamen's Union and the WWF. I go back to the Patrick's dispute of 1998 when I was down, first met Paddy on Port Beach Road down there in Fremantle, mate, in a little caravan when you were running the Blue down there, and we were making sure our truckies had no intentions of not supporting the waterside workers at the time. It was a fantastic dispute. We built a fantastic relationship. Ian Bray, good to see you, Ian, and of course Mick, good to see you. To the workers, the members of the MUA and other unions here today, thank you so much for coming down and keeping this Blue going. This Blue's got a long, long way to go. When I sit back and I think of the way that these foreign workers have been treated, and let's talk about Australian jobs, shall we? Just very quickly. With this government, Australian jobs, they make me want to vomit. Australian jobs, as long as you're not an Australian seafarer, as long as you're not an Australian engineer, as long as you're not an Australian cook on these boats, as long as you're not an Australian skipper or a master, it is sickening. One thing that when I listen to Albo and my colleagues from the Labor Party, we will not give up. Every second of every minute of every day that we are blessed to be part of this nation's capital here in the Parliament, we're going to continue to fight for Australian seafarers and all Australian jobs. The beauty going third, as most of it's been said, I just want to touch one thing. One thing I just want to reiterate. It makes me even sicker when I think to myself, when the coronial inquiry was going on over Captain Salas, as you know, in the Sage Sagittarius, when I was told, I got a phone call from a reporter up on the Sunshine State, while the coronial inquiry was going on, why this government spends hundreds of millions of dollars on black uniforms with gold pips, and I'm not having a crack at the hard-working men and women in the Australian Border Force. But by crying out loud, we've got a convicted gun runner sailing into the port of Gladstone. They didn't even know he was here on our shores. We had them here in the inquiry. They looked at me as though I was speaking another language. This is how much they care for Australian jobs when we've got this going on, while we've getting our men and our women, mainly our men on the MV Portland, dragged out of their bunks at night. What a disgraceful behaviour. I'm not going to go into any more sad stuff. It's good stuff. You've got one of the best unions that you could have. The most committed officials, apart from the TWU, CFMEU, AWU, but they're all good people. Oh, and the Textile Clothing and Footwear Union, Michelle, I can never forget you. United Voice are here too. So can I just say, Paddy and Ian, thank you so much. I do value the friendship that I have with the MUA. I'm so blessed to be supported by the MUA, but crikey, I do feel absolutely lousy when I walk back each night and I go home to my family and I think about those poor buggers that were dragged off that boat, and every other poor Australian seafarer has had to watch their good paying Australian jobs go. We will continue to fight. I'm not weakening. I'm not getting too old for the blue. I'll blue every minute that I'm here. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thanks very much, Glenn. And last but not least, man, and there's no introduction to anyone here, a long-term friend of the MUA and definitely a friend of working people in Australia, the member for Kennedy, Mr. Bob Cutter.
Sorry, I didn't know I was speaking today, but I just come down to support the people at work. I just want to say something about Anthony Albanese, because, you know, you've heard a lot of people saying the ALP is good. Well, from where I sit, they're not. I want to tell you that, right? But there are people inside the ALP that are capable of making it good. And it's in his book, you know, that he wrote about himself, that, you know, big nut and bastard. Anyway, but, you know, they quoted me in the book, and I went to see Albo because I'd be curious about this. I said, why are you different, Anthony? And I have to explain to him what I meant by why he was different. He knew what I meant. And if I had to explain, I'd sort of say, well, Albo's comfortable with, you know, the lowest sort of poorest employee person, and he's comfortable with big shots as well. You know, he's got what we used to call common touch. But I was a bit fascinated with this because I don't see it in Parliament. You know, instead of falling all over themselves, regardless of what political party they're in, if someone they think is important comes past. And he said, because I said, why are you different? He said, because I worked for 2.5 years in labouring jobs. And, you know, honestly, that should be a prerequisite. No one should be allowed in this place unless they've done that. But just two sentiments I want to express, because Anthony said just about everything I wanted to say if I was giving a speech at a function like this. You know, the Jones Act in America. I mean, they preach to us about free markets. And with all due respect, Anthony, your party does too. And they're shot with this idea of free markets. I'm just reading a book about what NAFTA did, not for Canada, the United States, and Mexico, what it did to them. The workers' incomes went down in all three countries. They didn't go up, they went down. And the Americans then owned everything in the other two countries, and they took all the wealth back to America. They still paid the poor bloody slaves working in Mexico the same as they were paying them before. They just made huge more profit, and they owned the companies. So it was only ever a trick by the rich corporates. And Piketty's book, if you like reading books, it says the new wealthy class, they don't own things like the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts. They don't own things. They are the controllers. They're the CEOs. And they pay themselves $10 and $20 and $50 million a year in salaries. They are the people that now run the world at our expense. And they preach us that it's beautiful. Well, have a look at NAFTA and read that book. It's The Class Struggle is the name of the book, right? Forget about that. I just want to say that Barrier Reef I represent, I think 6 of the last 7 boats that we've had destroying the reef, 6 of them were foreign crewed and foreign owned. Manufacturing, you know what was said earlier, we had 1.36 million people working in manufacturing. We now only have 900,000. And really, when you look at the OECD country, advanced countries, we're not sort of in there. We don't have any elaborately transformed column. We don't manufacture anymore. We don't produce a motor car. We don't produce a tyre. We don't produce an electric light bulb. We don't even produce our own flag. I mean, what sort of a country gets its flags from China, the ones that the government gives out? But you know what has happened now, Michelle, with your industries, that it's simply vanished. We have to buy everything from overseas. And we've only got 2 things that we can sell now. We've only got iron ore and coal. There's nothing else. And forget about agriculture. It's been built the same as you people have been built. So today, I just want to say to everybody here that the world has changed and it is changing. And the free market people, I just ask yourself this question. Does Europe free trade? No. What a joke, Europe free trading. Does China free trade? Does India free trade? Does Brazil free trade? I mean, does America free trade? Oh yeah, except for aluminium, except for steel, except for motor vehicles, except for manufacture of boats. Yeah, except for. When you put all the exceptions together, there's nothing left that it actually free trades in the United States. And there's, heaven only knows the works the United States has suffered. So I just want to pay great tribute to the fighters. You know, I haven't always been on the side of the unions, but the world has changed dramatically in the last 30 years. And I remember vividly, and I hate to say this, Elbow, but it was Paul Keating. He said, we are going to have total free trade, total free markets in this country. And I threw my boot down on the floor and I thought, oh, from now on I'm going to have to look after all the unions as well, you know, and I wanted to cry. Well, anyway, you know, Elbow, to make you feel good, Costello made him look like a nobody when it came to free trade and destroying every industry. God bless you all. Thank you very much for coming. And please stay loyal to each other and keep the fight. We have a saying in the Cowboys, and we have a habit of winning games in the last 2 minutes. We say, stay in the fight, stay in the fight, stay in the fight.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks very much. We do have one more speaker, and Bob's words were a great lead-in. There's a lot of the unions here today, all fight hard, but the ETU that we've seen over the last 12 months, none have fought harder. And I'd just like to introduce Matt Murphy, national official for the ETU.
Comrades, I get to follow Bob, which I can safely assume is the highlight of my day. Highlight of my day. I too would like to pay respects to traditional owners on behalf of the union and acknowledge its elders past and present. I'm here on behalf of Alan Hicks, who's in Sydney today, and I'm running our Power Industry Conference, which has been planned for Canberra during budget week. It's important to do that for our organisation, because our organisation's made a submission to a joint standing committee here about the future of Australia's electricity grid. That submission and that report that will come from that committee's work will determine future energy policy in this country. And we're in a transition stage. We're in a transition stage as a union from into renewables from the other technologies. That is a massive challenge for us, a huge challenge for us, because it provides employers an opportunity. It provides employers an opportunity to attack us again on a bigger issue. And one of the big thrusts, opportunity now that's provided to employers for us, and we're here today to express solidarity with the MUA and what happened with the Portland. Because the issue for us, under the opportunity for the employers, is casualisation and precarious work. If they can't send it offshore, if they can't send the stuff offshore, then they will casualise the workforce. They'll make the workforce precarious. That's the other tactic. And that's what we're facing: electrical contracting, electrical supply, power industry, manufacturing and various others. That's what we're copping. Now there's a credibility issue. We had figures come down the other week about membership of unions has gone down again. We need to restore the credibility of the trade union movement and get out there and organise. We need to generate members, not just jobs, but members. We need to get out there, organise and recruit and build. We then need to fight. We need to fight smart. We need to demand legislative change, and we need to drive cultural change. That's the agenda for us. Protect jobs, organise workers, get them as members, get the credibility, drive change, demand legislative change and drive cultural change. That is the challenge for us. Because within the ETU, one of the big debates for us is what are we going to hand on to the next generation. That's why we're hot on apprentices. That's why we demand good training outcomes and licensed outcomes for apprentices. So there's someone to take on the yoke later on. There's somebody to follow on from us, and we've got to hand over a series of industries and conditions and a legislative framework that actually protects those people. And if we don't do it, if we don't hand that on to the next generation, then we have failed. We have failed as a society, and we've failed our comrades and our comrades to come. So I urge everyone to get out there, organise, deliver, get bigger, and demand legislative change and lead cultural change. Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Yeah, thanks very much, comrade. Well, that wraps us up for this afternoon. I just want to thank everybody again for coming down, all the politicians and the union leaders present here now. And we'll be here tomorrow morning, bright and early, and again on Thursday. Ladies and gentlemen, comrades, thanks very much.